there, Don the Stat listeners. Ian here. Obviously, huge day for the club with the announcement that Brad Scott had been sacked. And like every other content creator out there, I've jumped on to give my thoughts. Jono was busy tonight. He'll give his reactions to the news on Thursday night when we do our main show. But I jumped onto the Patreon live and conducted exploration of my thoughts with regards to what happened today and what comes next. It was meant to have Rick Edwards as well, but I misread Patreon Live and didn't realize you couldn't invite anyone else to contribute. So it is just me. It is me interacting with the chat a little bit. It's a little bit freeform there as well. So it's not as polished an episode of Don the Stat that we would normally put out. But I think people are wanting to hear all sorts of views in these days with what's happened. So I thought I would put it out there for all listeners to hear. So here is that recording of my Patreon live with our subscribers. Enjoy. Well, look, thanks for coming along. I know it's been a pretty big day. It's a really big day in the history of the Essendon Football Club because we just took Jackson Artemis as our number one mid-season draft pick. I think that's the biggest story of the day. Chad, would you agree? Really exciting in terms of what he can bring to the club. I will have to watch a few more highlights. I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to the mid-season draft prior to today. Jono and I will do some work in regards to looking at what Jackson will bring to the team. But I think from just the highlights, I think the one thing I'm really excited about is the fact that he does seem to have some genuine pace, which is something that we are sorely lacking at the moment. It is good to see that Saad El Houli is going to resume in the VFL this week. But look, let's get to the big story of today. And I think when the news emerged, and I think I probably deluded myself into thinking that it wasn't going to happen and we were going to be a bit stronger and sort of hold the line with the increasing media pressure and outside pressure. But when it was emerged this morning that Brad Scott would be sacked, I think my overriding emotion was sadness. I'm just sad that we're here again. I think even if you think back 3 or 4 years ago, the first year of the podcast ended with the Ben Rutten sacking, which at the time I thought was premature. I thought he didn't get an opportunity to really explore there, but the club decided to go in a different direction. And I think that different direction, a lot of what has come out of that different direction that the club has gone in has a lot of positives, right? So there's been a big focus on development. There's been a big focus on getting the football department right and getting the resources that the football department needs for success, changing the list strategy or changing the people who are responsible for the list strategy. I think that change as a whole has been really good, and I think it will bear fruit into the long term. I also think that the big strengths of what we had with Brad Scott was his ability to sort of rise above or not have the outside factors influence as much and really be able to impose his will on the football department, including getting rid of some people who probably had their turn and need to move on. And I think with him and Craig Fozzo there and Dave Barham, I thought they did a great job in terms of setting up the club hopefully for success. But it really does come back to sadness because we're sitting here again. This is the sixth senior coach gone since Kevin Sheedy departed. I think the longest, Busher was the longest one. I think he got 5 years. And again, you argue, was he given the chance to success? And I think it's just difficult to be sitting here again going through this. I feel like we keep ending up in this situation where we are impatient for success. We try something for a couple of years. It's not immediately working. The horses panic, and then the leadership panics. And we end up in this situation once again. I think if I was looking at it, I was probably coming around to the conclusion that Brad wasn't going to be a long-term coach. But again, like with Rutten, I thought he should have been able to very least see out this year, or see out his contract to allow the other aspects of the football department to settle and play out. And so I think that's disappointing for me. You could have had a situation where you were looking for a senior coach post Brad, But I guess that's also not necessarily fair to him that he's in to do a job that he's not going to be able to see through for the long term. Uh, so I'm sad for the fans. I'm sad we have to go through this, and I think these last few weeks has really divided the fan base, and I think that's a really sad thing because we're stronger. We should be a strong, united fan base. It was clear there was a lot of people in the fan base who were dissatisfied with Brad, dissatisfied with the section of the club. There are others who are wanting to hold the line and not sort of give in to that outside pressure, that old Essendon pressure that had has continually brought down coaches throughout this last 15, 20 year period. But unfortunately, that they've made the move they have. Well, I guess unfortunately is probably not the right word. They've made their decision. These are people who had originally made the decision to keep Brad on. They weren't in the number one hot seats when Brad was recontracted or contracted in the first place. But they agreed with that decision, and now they're going to have to justify the decision that they are making now. I think so. I think you can put a lot of caveats on Brad's time at Essendon. Was he ever really truly accepted? Did the club shift strategy on him in the sort of 23-24 period, or was there a real opportunity to look at what the list had and then make a decision? I think we've seen with newspaper articles there was a real pivot to the draft. I think the draft remained a focus, and I know that the media is loving to go on the fact that we brought in all those free agents at the end of 2023, but we'd lost a lot of experience. If you look even just at the Ben Mackay example, pardon me, if we looked at the Ben Mackay example, yes, we paid a lot to get him in, but we didn't spend any draft capital. And at the time, our key backs were perennially injured, Jordan Ridley, Zach Reed. We had an 18-year-old Lewis Hayes. We had perennially injured James Stewart, who we were looking to get rid of. We had undersized Jaden Laverty. And we had Brandon Zerk-Thatcher, who was looking to leave the club. So as much as you want to point to, you brought this player in, you have to have players on your list. So I think that gets overblown because we did still go to the draft. And as we've done in the last couple of years, we've really invested heavily in the draft. And the unfortunate thing about that and about young players is that you've got inconsistent performances, right? Some weeks it looks good, some weeks it doesn't. And then you have the flow and effect of the injuries. And I think it is understated how damaging the injuries were in a couple of aspects. Firstly, in the ability to build cohesion and build a cohesive game plan. I know that even at the start of last year when we had most of our players, the game plan wasn't looking great. It was still a lot of defending ball in hand. When you lose all those players at the back end of last year, you can't continue working on things there or build a cohesive plan. But also, it also had the impact of creating that sort of losing culture within the team. You're just going in and losing every week. And that obviously has an effect on the rest of the team. You had the captain wanting to leave at the end of last year. And as much as there's, I think Zach, for the most part, has come back and been really professional, that still has ongoing and on-flowing effects for the rest of the side. And at the start of this year, obviously we didn't start the season very well. There have been really good signs at times. You've got the Melbourne win, you've got patches of the Gold Coast game and of the GWS game, you've got the back half of the Bulldogs. So there were signs that at times we could play good football. It just wasn't enough. And so I think there are mitigating factors for Brad's time at Essendon, but I also see the cold hard facts. We won one game in 25 weeks, and that in itself was unsustainable. I also think that, far be it from me to praise Kane Corns, and spoiler alert, he's currently the front runner for the Barrett Award nomination this week. Although, given all the things that are about to come out, that could change. But he was really strong speaking today about the senior players and the fact that the senior players have let Brad down. I think to an extent that's true, and I do think that a lot of our coaches in the past few cycles have paid the price for the senior players not fully committing to a plan and not fully seeing things through and not performing at the level that they need to when times have got tough. And that is then rebounded on the coach, because at the end of the day, it's a lot harder to move on 5 or 6 players than it is to move on a coach, particularly because fans generally have a lot more of a connection to the players than they do to the coach. So the coach often cops it. So I think there is an element of that in terms of the senior players need to have a look at themselves and how they've contributed to this. I'm not sure how often that they do that. But at the end of the day, it's the coach's job to keep the players and to keep them on side. I think there was also obviously the risk that the young players could get disenchanted and want to move on. I think that's kind of overblown. I think if you look at some of the poorer performing teams of the last few years, you look at the West Coast and the North Melbourne, they haven't really lost, other than Horne-Francis at North Melbourne, haven't really lost anyone that they were desperate to keep. Although, again, I think both of those clubs also made coaching changes. So potentially they could have been on the way out of losing players, but they made the coach change and that's allowed players to come around. So, yeah, I get where they come from. As I said from the start, I'm just really sad that we've come to this situation. Again, I thought in terms of the president and the CEO speaking today, I think they said what they had to say. They've supposedly left things really open in terms of who is going to be the next coach. I do like that they talked about wanting to have a full process, and I think for me to really get behind this decision, it has to be an extensive, open process. I think that's for Essendon fans, whether you agree with the decision to get rid of Brad Scott or not. I think we all should be behind that idea that it is an extensive process. It's a process where people go into the decision about who should be the coach with an open mind and not have preconceived ideas about who it could be. As a risk coach, like no one in their right mind would have thought that Chris Fagan, with his background, would have been a two-time premiership coach. Obviously, he didn't have an AFL. He didn't play at the senior level. He sort of went the back roads to the coaching, and obviously he's turned out to be a great success. I think if you lined up 5 or 6 people next to Chris Fagan, who are normal coaching aspirants, he probably wouldn't get a look in if you were just picking them by name. But the fact that he went through that process, that's important. So I think, yeah, that for me, that's my non-negotiable. It has to be a full open process. I think there are pros and cons to having pros and cons to whether you get a new coach or an existing coach, or someone who has coached in the past. Obviously, we've gone both in the last 2 years. So Knights, Hurd, and Rutten were untried coaches. You've had Thompson. Although he probably could have kept going if Hurd wasn't coming back. Woosha and Scott as tried coaches. So we've done both sides, and all have ended in disaster in the sense that they've all been sacked without being successful. I think you lean towards the new coach if it wasn't Essendon, you'd lean towards the new coach, right? Because you look at the past history, that it's the newer coaches that have sort of been able to be successful. Even the ones who've come into whether they've come into an existing system or they've helped build a new system. Arguably, you could talk about the Paul Roos to Goodwin handover. That could be a potential option that you sort of bring in that pair there. But you need to be pretty. I think it would take a special kind of senior coach to do what Roos did. Obviously, I think that they've all got massive egos if they're going to run a coach, and to be like, I'm just going to be here for 2 or 3 years, help set things up for someone else to get all the credit. Sorry. I'm not sure how many senior coaches that are currently out there would be willing to do that. But I think the concern with a junior coach, and we saw that as one of the reasons why Rutten was sacked and we brought Brad Scott, is that a junior coach is probably less likely to be able to withstand the pressure, depending on who it is. Obviously, I think you think about someone like James Kelly, who's probably the best of both worlds in terms of is coming from a successful system, is mostly an outside Essendon player, but he has got that connection of having played for Essendon and having played for Essendon at a difficult time. He really stepped up for us when we needed him in that 2016 season. So I guess just on paper, without really examining all the options closely, I think those qualities stand out, at least in terms of the optics for Essendon fans and for the wider AFL community. But obviously, you could look at a senior coach. Whether I think of all the senior coaches that are out there that would interest me, Longmire's probably the one that jumps off the page as being the best suited. I think he left at the peak of his powers. Really, he was still getting Sydney to grand finals. You look at someone like a Simpson, West Coast were where they were. They were right down the bottom when he departed. That part of that wasn't his fault. Buckley was on the way down when he departed. Hinkley was on the way down when he departed. So I think if you were to have a front runner for existing coach, it'd be John Longmire. That depends on whether he wants the job or he's refreshed from his break. He'd be my number one pick in terms of experienced coach. But I think it's time we talked about the Elliford in the room. It reads better on my phone when I wrote it down than I said it. James Hird. All right, so part of me thinks that the media has been so keen to pull down Brad because they know they can then spend 3 months. They can spend 3 months writing articles linking her to the Essendon coaching job, and that will get massive clicks. I think that part of me is cynical enough to believe that that's the only reason, and then really agitating for Hird to get the job because then that just brings more clicks. I think if James Hird got the Essendon job, and then they could keep talking about him, given his notoriety in the AFL community, that would draw huge traffic for them. Blake, I think James is on tonight on Footy Classified. I'm not sure if that's 8:30 or 9:30 tonight, and I imagine he will get asked about it. It'll be really interesting to see what he says. I lean towards not Hird, generally because of the lack of experience. I know he did 6 months or 3 months with GWS as an assistant. I know he's doing some part-time work with Port Melbourne. My rough lean is that it shouldn't be Hird unless he went through the full process and committed to the full process and he presented to a board that wasn't Essendon people and they ticked him off as the best candidate. I think that would be the most acceptable. My biggest concern with James Hird getting involved in the process, though, and I'd love to give credit to the person I read this off. This is not my original thought. I can't remember if it was on the Patreon or on some other website that I was spending a lot of time on, or other websites that I was spending time on rather than doing my work today. Thanks, Essendon, for making this one of my least productive work days in history. Is that if Hird indicates in any way that he's interested in the job, that might actually put off a lot of prospective candidates because they'll think that it's all going to, if Hird is interested, and given that Welsh is making the final decision as the president and Solomon's around it and involved, that it's a stitch up and it's just going to be Hird who gets the job. So I think that is my big concern with Hird getting involved, or even, as soon as the process is announced, Hird either has to say he's in or he is out of the process. He can't be half pregnant on that, because if he's half pregnant on that, it's going to keep other good quality candidates from putting their hand up. Because I think it's a stitch up there. Look, that's my general thoughts there. There's a lot of people in the chat, so if anyone has any questions or things they want me to react to, please put it in the chat, and I will do so. Corey Enright, David, I think he's got a lot of raps. I don't see St Kilda letting him go. I imagine right now with Carlton and Tasmania lurking as well as us, they would be right now trying to work out a long-term plan that involves Ross handing over to Enright and sort of committing to him, a la Josh Carr from Hinkley. Abe, I think in terms of when do we think we appoint a new coach, it's going to be hard because a lot of the coaches that are a lot of the coaches who would be interested are going to be involved in keeping their teams together. You think about all the assistant coaches, there. They've all got their other jobs to work on. You've got to probably have it in place before. Ideally, I think you would like to have it in place by the bye week before the finals, right? Because you're going to have to start having conversations with players about their futures on the list, and you're going to have to start having conversations with players who are you have to start having conversations with players that you're interested in bringing to your club, right? And the earlier you can get the coach, the better it is. So I think thinking back to 2022 when we let go of Ratton, Scott wasn't appointed till well late in the year. I think just before the draft and trade period, and that doesn't give him a lot of time to get involved in those conversations. And I think we brought in Setterfield and Wiedemann in that off season. You know, nothing special in that off season. Again, I doubt at this point in time top level players are really going to be considering Essendon. So yeah, I think you would want to have it in place probably by the end of the season. In regards to just before the final start, I think that's the perfect time to get it done. Jack, how do I feel about Solomon as the assistant? I think he's the least worst option. He's done it before. He did it up in the Gold Coast, and I think that the interim coach is on a hiding to nothing. Gives him I think like who was the other options, right? So Cam Roberts, Ben Jacobs, Brent Stanton. I'm forgetting someone who else would be a main assistant coach. I think that he was the least worst option. He had the most experience of those assistant coaches, and I think he's also probably the best placed of those assistant coaches to be able to handle the media. So I think that's why that is. Obviously, he seems like he's going to want to be a senior coach, and he might want to be the senior coach at Essendon. Interesting to see if he does a Josh Fraser and tries to tamp down any thoughts that he'll be the senior coach. So I think that's where that is at. What questions have I missed? Blake, I sort of talked about the reactions. I mean, it sounded like every other coach taking press conference. We've gone in a different direction. We have a strong belief in what we're doing. I don't think they really said anything that you wouldn't have expected. Like, you probably could have put any other coach taking press conference on, and you would have got the same themes there. I'm not really worried about what they're saying in this press conference. I'm worried about their actions. As I said, I want to see that full, comprehensive coach search process. If they do that, then I'll be satisfied. It's less about what they said at the press conference there. Who asked about the coach or the captain for the weekend? It's got to be either Langford or Redmond, you would think, because I think all the other leadership options are out. I think what I prefer, probably Langford. I think would be a good set. You can sort of play at the back line. But it's a very interim role there, and I think that's where I would be. Any other questions in the chat in regards to things that come up today? We are having our Patreon Q&A, the proper one, in a couple of weeks during the bye rounds. I think that's it. Unless we get any last minute questions, I might start wrapping up. G is an interesting one. Like, I look at one of the criticisms of this last few years at Essendon is that the assistants haven't been much chop. But we had Carousella, who was highly rated. We had Gian Syracuse, who was highly rated, and neither of them really did much to improve the team's situation. So I guess it's different if you are the senior coach and you can really set everything. You're sort of working to someone else's plan when you're an assistant coach. I'm not given his lack of real impact at Essendon. I wouldn't be high on my list at this stage. Obviously, that could change with the way in which they present. I'm not going to be on the panel. I'm happy to do it. I'll put my hand up. So if Welshie, if you're listening and you want a teacher who's got 2 years of third grade football experience, more than happy to be on the panel. But I know there's probably about 2,000 people in front of me on that queue there. What I want the new Solly to focus on right now, I think it's just back to basics, right? You just sort of want them to have fun. My big fear with this change is that we start winning some games off the back of this new coach bounce. that gets us, higher on the ladder and takes us out of the range of the real top end talent. Um, I yeah, I think we know that we need to bring in top end talents, but that's part of the reason why I prefer to keep Brad around for the rest of the year. You want to see some levels of improvement, some levels of competitiveness, but the reality is that if we're going to be able to produce from here and go further in later years, we're going to need that top end talent. I think we've had two really strong drafts, and obviously the draft before had Katie and Roberts. But the last two drafts we've gone really heavy into taking talent, and talent that looks quite good at the moment. I think we need at least one more heavy talent draft, which is this upcoming one, and then we're insulated a little bit from the Tasmanian draft because we've got all the NGA players, right? So in essence, that will be 5 big years of drafting. I think that's probably the minimum that you would need to do before you start looking at, really trying to bring in outside talent to complement those younger players. So that's where I'll be. As much as you want to see wins, right? And I think we're all bloody sick of losing games, and I'm sick of coming on the pod every week. Well, we lost again, and here's why we lost, and trying to find some positives out of it. Gee, a win would be nice. Maybe not this week, but maybe against Carlton in against Carlton in a couple of weeks. That'd be quite nice to head into the bye. Yeah, I just don't want to get out of that range of that top end talent. I think the rebuild is something we've needed for a while. We haven't really coped well with the realities of what a rebuild looks like and the losing that comes with it, and the swings in terms of levels of performance, and obviously that has resulted in Brad Scott's sacking. But I just hope that they stick the course with that. Like, whoever comes in needs to embrace the youth strategy. Like, if we're trading first rounders this year, that's going to be a huge mistake there. Do I think Scott sacking makes it more likely we'll seek an assistance package from the AFL? Greater likelihood we get one. I think it makes it less likely that we get one because we're sort of in a lot of the reasons why we're in this position is of our own making. I definitely think we should be asking for an assistance package. It's clear for a long time that we're struggling to perform. I think the way that the system that the AFL has set up has made it harder for teams to rebound. It takes longer for teams to rebound. Partly because it's made staying up the top a lot easier. So once you get there, you can become self-sustaining like Geelong, like Sydney, and obviously not all the best teams have done that. But there is that, and if they're constantly up there, that's 2 spots that other teams can't take, and so that does make it challenging to rebuild. I think I'm less about draft. I'm less concerned about getting extra draft picks, although that'd be nice. I kind of want to see some extra rookie spots. Like, I was doing writing the preview for the West Coast game coming up this week, and that made me remember that their assistance package included 4 extra rookie spots. Given that we're going to have 2 extra rookies at the moment because of Setterfield and now Artemis there, I wouldn't mind asking for some extra rookie spots so we can keep a couple of these players on the list for a bit longer to see what they're made of, because there's going to be a squeeze of a couple of players who might not deserve to go, whilst also then allowing us to bring in other rookies. The badge, the thing that I need, I think I mentioned it earlier, I think the thing I need to see to make this think was the right decision is that we engage in a fully in-depth process that is extensive, that is deep, that is colorblind or reputation blind, and that results in Essendon getting the best possible coach that's out there. If we do that, then I think this decision will work itself out. If we do what we've done previously, we put our thumb on the scales. So obviously we went and had headhunted Woosha, and I understand the reasons for that because of where we were coming out of the saga. we headhunted her and Thompson. We didn't really engage in a process there. We basically chose Rutten to be Bush's successor without a process. And whilst Brad Scott went through a process, the part of the parameters was that we were looking for an experienced coach. That's why we talked to Clarkson. That's why we talked to Ross Lyon. And ultimately, we ended up with Brad Scott. I just want to see a full process. If I see that and we get a coach out of that, I'll be pretty happy. Doctor, so obviously, I think Brad's talking on agenda centers now. He's mentioned that Brad, now that he's out of Clubland, so that Zach should have been let go last year and should leave at the end of the year. So I think I'll wrap this up. Jono and I will be back on Thursday night. Jono will give his extensive thoughts about where we're at in terms of what's happened and his opinion there. And then obviously previewing the West Coast game. John, I'm not going to answer that. That either of those sounds like torture, like pure torture. Jay Clark or Sam McClure. I'd rather cut my ears off. Anyway, that'll do for tonight. Thanks everyone for joining. Obviously, thanks everyone for your support. The chat's been a great place today. I know that there's people with different opinions, but 99.9% of the interactions in there today have been done in the right way. And I think that's the great thing about this community. We have different opinions, but we can express them in ways that are quite civilized. It's pretty toxic out there on Twitter and on Facebook. It's certainly not been fun other than this little pocket. I know Jono appreciates this as well and how you guys interact in here. But that'll do me. Thanks again, everyone. Stay safe and go Dons.